Before time, there was nothing. And then? As the universe expanded from an infinitesimal point, great beings from other dimensions seeped into our reality, fleeing an incomprehensible conflict known as the Great Celestial War. As gravity compressed hydrogen into higher elements around them, the great gods slept, curling up to heal. Around one, a small blue planet formed, and as a young species on its surface grew, the great Earth Dragon, as the godlike being would become known, started to stir. In the early 20th century, some men and women started to develop great powers beyond any other. With the advent of these superheroes, the world, once very much like our own, would never be the same again. These are the stories of the Mirage universe, and you're listening to the Mirage Barrage. Welcome, friends, to the Mirage universe, a universe of heroes, aliens, and adventure. Now, there are a myriad of heroes within the Mirage universe, and they're all quite varied. But despite how different all of them are, there are a few common traits. One of those common traits, not to all, but to most, is that these heroes and villains often have unique, sometimes colorful costumes and names. The question is, why? These costume characters really started popping up around the 1930s because that is when the Great Earth Dragon started to wake up. The Great Earth Dragon, by the way, is an ancient cosmic being from another dimension. Don't let the name fool you. He, if you can call such a being he, isn't just some giant flying lizard. This is a being beyond our comprehension. Now, he does have a body, or at least he made a body for himself when he entered our physical universe shortly after the Big Bang. Since he comes from another reality, and also he's not awake to tell us, we don't know if he had a body before, or if it was the same body that he has now, or really if the universe he came from at all had what we call physical matter, or... You know what, let's stop for a bit. We don't know much about the Great Earth Dragon. In fact, we don't know how much we don't know. Let me lay out a few things that we do know. First, he's big. Like, really big. He takes up much of Earth's inner core. He was so large that he actually had gravity around him, and he pulled the matter together that would eventually form our little blue planet. So yeah, he's huge. Second, he's asleep. Asleep might not be quite the right word, but he'd definitely be able to talk to us if he wanted to, or leave the planet, or do anything, really. But he seems to be completely still in there, so while we don't know necessarily how his being works, let's call him asleep. It's a good enough approximation. Third, he's crazy powerful. He was able to move between universes and entered ours shortly after the Big Bang. He can easily bend space and time and could easily crack a planet in two if he was awake to do so. He is so powerful that even when he's asleep, his dreams, we think he has dreams, affect our world. Like I said, he started to wake up in the 1930s, or become more active. One way or another, that's when some costumed superheroes and villains started to emerge. The ability to talk to animals, lift 10 tons, or run faster than sound were suddenly found in people who donned colorful costumes and began fighting or causing crime. Now, if you know much, or anything really about human physiology, you know that even the best of our bodies would have quite a hard time lifting 10 tons or running faster than sound. For example, imagine sticking your head out of the window of a fighter jet and then being able to run so fast that every second feels exactly like that. You're going so fast that when you turn a corner, you're going to probably at least pull 4 or 5 Gs, and you're just running there. Safe to say, someone who could do that didn't just get some extra leg muscles, but something really, really strange happened. Now, at the time, people might have guessed getting struck by lightning or falling into a chemical vat might have given these people these powers, and some of those things really did happen to the various heroes and villains, but it wasn't really the cause. See, the dreams of the Great Earth Dragon would sometimes latch onto the minds of specific people, especially if they just went through something traumatic or extreme. And then the dragon would just bend the laws of reality to give them a superpower. Now, I mean, he didn't consciously do this. It's just like his imagination ran wild. He'd experience what these people would go through their own eyes, because he could latch into their minds, like I said, and he can bend reality. And then he would just let his imagination run wild, and sometimes that meant he might have rewritten reality a little bit. Like he accidentally dreamed up some sort of code to hack reality, so that some guy could shoot flames out of his mouth without getting burned. Now, it doesn't always work out so nicely, but that's not what today's story is about. Today's story relates back to my first question. Why do heroes and villains feel the need to wear such fancy costumes and give themselves silly names? There are practical answers. Many of their costumes actually serve a purpose. They're armor or gadgets of some sort, and code names are useful to keep identity secret. But even when we consider these things, there's something unique about supers. Even costumes that have built-in functional features tended to go for style as much as, or even more than, function, and heroes without secret identities would often still use codenames. So why? Well, if you ask me, I think it's to help give them a sense of identity. Because you have to remember, these people are one of a kind. If you suddenly wake up to find out you have the power to fly, things are going to be different for you. As soon as others find out, they're not going to look at you the same way. You're not Derek or Martha anymore, you're that person who can fly. And now even strangers know who you are, and even those close to you have to look at you a bit different. I mean, if you're out with your friends and you know one of them at any point can start to lift off the ground, that's going to change the way you look at them, isn't it? And that's not to say you're going to look at them like a freak or anything. You can still be best of friends, but now things are different because he or she can do things that are literally impossible for you, and for 99% of the other people out there to do as well. And if you're the flying guy, you're probably going to notice this, how people start acting differently around you. Now, if you're not going to hide your power, you kind of have to embrace it, don't you? You can't just say, hey, I'm the same guy as before, it's just now I can reach the stratosphere. Something radically strange has happened here, and if you're not going to hide it, you are either going to have to pretend like nothing's happened, fat chance, or embrace what makes you different. And when you embrace what makes you different, you also have the opportunity to define yourself. You're not just flying guy, you're Halo, the fearless skydiver, or Blue Jay, the friendly lookout. So not only do you get to say, yeah, I'm special, but you also get to define what it means, and hence, who you are. And if you give yourself a fancy name and costume, you also have the chance to take it off and go, okay, now it's time to pretend I'm normal again. I don't fly, the Blue Jay does, which I'm sure helps you to feel a bit better when people tend to gawk at you. You give them a clear signal that, okay, now you can gawk when I've got the suit on, but when it's off, you have to stop now. Now, imagine this is how you live your life, but suddenly this is all stripped away. You've embraced what made you different, and you've crafted an identity for yourself. You know who you are and what your place is in the world, and then suddenly, all that's gone. This is what happened to Greta Alhross. We joined Greta just as she woke up in her hospital room with the start, and once again accidentally pulled the needles from her IVs out. She cursed herself as she realized that she had done so once again. Greta was exceptionally durable, and she barely noticed when she ripped them out, especially when she came out of Nasty Dream, like what just happened. Once more, it was about the day she had been hit, during the Battle of Armageddon. In a few moments, nurses were back to calm the machines and prepare a new IV. They reset the various tubes and equipment, measuring her breathing, heart rate, and blood pressure, and double-checked the readouts after that. Other medical staff might be concerned by the strange readings on the screens with abnormally high blood pressure, for instance, but these nurses were specifically trained and recognized this was normal for Greta. Because Greta wasn't human. Not even a human enhanced by the Great Earth Dragon. Not every hero was, actually, and she was one of the few exceptions out there. Technically speaking, she was an alien. An Ashfelian. Now, you might question that statement if you looked at her, as she didn't appear all that different from you or I. She looked like an athletic young woman with perhaps darker eyebrows than you'd be used to, but otherwise only her waist-length pure white hair really stood out. That and her two differently colored eyes, the left blue and the right a glowing green, but that's a different matter. If you're thinking at this point that it's a remarkable coincidence that Greta happened to look so human, well, you'd normally be right. It would be a strange coincidence if an alien species looked so much like us. But there's a reason. The nurses prepped a special needle to put in the new IV. The needle was tipped with the slightest amount of xenocyte. Xenocyte reacts with Ashfelians in several different ways. The first and most obvious is that it can pierce their skin and electrostatic field, which makes them super durable, with relative ease. Another way is that if it's hit with high-power beams, it can emit radiation that, depending on the frequency and exposure, can either strengthen or poison an Ashfelian. Captain Cosmos was the most famous Ashfelian, and he always kept a piece of xenocyte in the chest cavity of his armor/costume. He had it set so that it could be struck by beams and then enhance his strength in short bursts. The key being short bursts. During the Battle of Armageddon, he went a bit further. The Battle of Armageddon was, at risk of stating the obvious, big. The short version is this. A lesser being that also entered our dimension near the Big Bang, who was called the Usurper, wanted to, steal the Great Earth Dragon's power while he was asleep. This was the Usurper's specialty, as the name implies, stealing powers from others through sabotage and subterfuge, though he had never stolen from a being as powerful as the Great Earth Dragon before. But to get his power, first he'd need to expose the dragon. So he got a bunch of scum from around the galaxy, and an artificial satellite, a metal moon, smaller than our moon, but still plenty big, and planned to drop it on the planet, cracking open the crust. Naturally, those living on the planet didn't like this idea, and in a somewhat surprising turn of events, heroes and villains alike teamed up to fight off the invasion or annihilation of planet Earth. That fight was the Battle for Armageddon. Now, two very important things happened. Two for our story. A lot of important things happened, but that's for another time. First, Captain Cosmos died. Captain Cosmos was the foremost Ashfelian on the planet and the first one to go public. He was the greatest hero of the free world and a father to most of the other Ashfelians, including Greta. Greta and several of the others had been sidekicks of his, and they all took the name Alhross and considered themselves a family, since there were so few Ashfelians on the planet. Captain Cosmos was also the strongest of the Ashfelians, and when the metal moon came barreling down at the planet and time was running short, he made a dramatic choice. He flew to a laboratory he had prepared. It had a large quantity of xenocyte, and it was installed into several projectors. He powered up the machines and pointed them at himself, then fired. Ashfelians have many unique characteristics. I've already mentioned the super durability, and you might have already guessed at their super strength. But their internal structure relies on and disperses a certain energy that can be used in different ways. For the Alhrosses, there were 3 points of emergence: the feet, the hands, and the eyes. From their feet, they could produce a burst of force, a shockwave. The energy isn't refined here, so while it could give a mighty sonic kick or the like, it's not a very precise instrument. But Captain Cosmos, or Cece as he was sometimes known, figured out a technique so that, when used carefully, a steady wave of force could be emitted from their feet to propel them upwards. Captain Cosmos discovered how to make Ashfelians fly. The second point of energy discharge is from the palms of their hands. The energy is more focused and can be roughly called a concussive beam. By that I mean that while it's some form of energy, it can push physical objects. A beam of light shoots from the Ashfelian's hand, and when it makes contact with something, it can push it back, strike like a punch, or hold something up. This is what Cece used to stop the metal moon's descent. He blasted himself with xenocyte radiation to such a degree that his concussive beams and himself became strong enough to stop the moon from falling, and he did so long enough for it to fall into a stable orbit, preventing the end of the world as we know it. But that was a lot of radiation to take in, more than any Ashfelian had taken before, and he knew as soon as he did it that it would be lethal. And sure enough, a few minutes after the metal moon was stabilized, Jack Alhross, aka Captain Cosmos, died. And what bothered Greta most about this was that she never saw her surrogate father's sacrifice. No, before any of that could happen, while she was fighting off hordes of alien invaders, she was struck in the head and fell to earth, unconscious and nearly dead. This is the second event that concerns our story. She had been exceptionally lucky, the doctors told her. She didn't feel like it. She had been hit by a solid xenocyte bullet and had been struck in the forehead. By some miracle, she hadn't been killed, even as the bullet was lodged in her brain. She had been shocked by this, of course, but didn't feel all that different aside from being weak once she woke up. That is, until they started the testing. Once the nurses finished attaching the IV and checking that Greta didn't need anything else, they shut off the lights and left the room. Alone in the dark, antiseptic-smelling room, Greta curled up into a ball, her legs still under the sheet. The distinctly not too unpleasant smell, the aches and pains, and the quiet noise of the hospital would keep her up now. She was dead tired, but she was also sick of trying to fight to fall asleep. Here, even when all you had to do was lie back and turn your brain off, it was difficult. Everything felt difficult. And then something tapped on her window. Greta turned and saw the silhouette of Greta Alhross. She was floating outside her fifth-story window. Floating. Of course she was. Hovering in place was a difficult maneuver, requiring poise and concentration before muscle memory could take over. Greta had practiced over a year under Captain Cosmos' tutelage before she got it, but Perfect Sylvia had done it in a month. To Greta's irritation, she saw that Sylvia was still in her dark red armored costume, complete with the unnecessary mask. As government-sanctioned heroes, their identities were a matter of public record. Just as she was about to slip out of bed to walk to the window, Greta remembered her IV. She saw the tubing was too short to let her reach and huffed. Grabbing the whole medication stand, she lifted it over the bed and dragged it to the window before setting it down. She fumbled awkwardly to open the window, her fingers, or maybe her mind, finding the task more difficult than it should have been. In frustration, she tugged at the latch and groaned in exasperation as it snapped off. She slid the window open and tossed the latch aside. Sylvia slipped neatly through the window and touched down gently on the tile floor. Greta stood with her arms crossed. "Sorry, Greta," Sylvia said, removing her mask and shaking out her wind-swept hair. "I meant to come sooner. How are you?" "Oh, I'm just great," Greta couldn't help but say. "Nothing I like better than being stuck in a hospital bed all day." "I can imagine. Did the doctors tell you how much longer you had to stay here?" 1 week. 1 week? 1 week. The doctors had actually said between 7 and 9 days, but Greta had already decided it would be 7. "Any idea how long until you're fully... they're not sure." Though apparently not fast enough. Greta had just noticed the insignia on Sylvia's breastplate. The insignia of the Scouter Supreme. Greta had been Cece's first sidekick, and at the time took the name Super Scout. The Alhrosses liked alliteration, can't you tell? Greta had later ventured out on her own heroics for a while, so Candace, and later Sylvia, both took up the name Super Scout at one time or another, depending on who was Jack's sidekick at the time. Partway through Sylvia's tenure as Super Scout, Greta decided to rejoin the fold. In acknowledgement of her experience, Captain Cosmos suggested that, instead of Greta taking back the title of Super Scout, she call herself Scouter Supreme instead. A sort of rank above Super Scout, if you will. After all, Sylvia would be staying on board, and so she could call herself Super Scout. Greta always liked the idea, mostly because it felt like Cece was acknowledging the progress she had made on her own. She wasn't crawling back to him to return to being just a sidekick, she was her own person. And now, here Sylvia was, wearing her title. "Huh?" Sylvia said, and then quickly realized what Greta meant. "Oh, I'm sorry, Greta. I should have changed before I came here." "Keep it your dirty little secret." "It's nothing like that. I was just going to say it would have been considerate, but we're a bit busy after the world nearly ended." "Yeah, I'm sure you are." "The only reason I'm wearing this is because we're short-handed. Candace has come back to the fold, and she needed a name, too." "So there's no room for me as either Scout, huh?" "You know that's not what this is about." "You always wanted that title. Jealous much?" "Greta, you're being childish. With Cece gone, we need to wave the flag and show we're still strong. People are expecting a Scouter Supreme one way or another. It's not about you or me." Greta didn't say anything. Sylvia might be right, but it didn't make a difference. It still stung, especially because she couldn't do anything to change the situation. All she could do is sit and wait and heal. "Look, I brought a few of your things. I thought it might make being here a little easier." Sylvia gently set down a carved wooden box on a nearby table. "I know it doesn't feel like it," Sylvia said, "but I am there for you. Just give me a call when you need it." And, as if on cue, her communicator in her visor beeped. With a brief, semi-apologetic look, Sylvia slipped her mask back on, hiding her eyes again. "Go," Sylvia said simply and listened for the response. "Understood." "Greta, just go." Sylvia stopped as if to say something, then scoffed and slipped back through the window. Greta took the small box and sat back on the bed. She fumed, angry at Sylvia for once again being Little Miss Perfect, and angry at herself that she had gotten so irritated. Everything was harder here, especially relaxing. Opening the box, she saw a collection of trinkets that usually made her smile. There was a train ticket from her time in East Germany, one of the last trips she had made before slipping through the Iron Curtain. Next to it was a particularly bad action figure made of her, from back in her early heroing days in the 80s. The toy manufacturer gave her bizarrely large thighs that Greta always found funny. To this day, she couldn't explain why she kept the thing, as it barely had a passing resemblance to her. She didn't know. Maybe she guessed because it was just funny. And lastly, there was a little pink ribbon, tied into a bow. Greta had never been the girliest creature, but this she really liked. It had been a gift from Cece, from Jack Alhross, who met her in the free world as a little girl and promised to take care of her. Back then, she had been small and scared, and thinking of that, she felt small and scared once more. On a whim, she put the small bow in her hair. It seemed a bit sad and pathetic, faded as it was, sitting on top of her now that she was a woman. Whatever comfort it had once given, it had none to provide now. She curled up and started to let the tears stream down her face. And as she curled up, she barely noticed the IV getting pulled out again, or the beeping of the alarms as the nurses came to fix it. The funeral for Captain Cosmos was a grand public ordeal. Held in the streets of Empire City, it wasn't just public, it was open to the world. People watched from skyscrapers or from home on any one of the various news stations, as their crews gathered round on the ground and in helicopters above. The guests of honor were seated on a raised platform, while hundreds flocked around in the streets. Greta recognized most of the invited guests, colleagues and associates who had worked with the captain. There were several faces she didn't know, and assumed were government officials of some type, people who got seats through connections rather than because they were actually loved ones or friends. Of course, they were there too. The entire Alhross family was present, obviously, though Greta wasn't in costume. Not all heroes' presents were wearing costumes, and the ones who chose to had selected modified versions with darker, more somber color schemes to reflect the occasion. And at the very front were the Stormbreakers, the #1 superhero team in the world, international defenders of peace and freedom. Captain Cosmos had been a founding member back in the 40s, though few of those original members were still young enough to be on the team. Like her, once Captain Cosmos reached maturity, he aged much slower than usual, a blessing of their alien heritage. There was Sekhmet Sion, the second in command of the Stormbreakers. First now, Greta realized. The Egyptian hero had the remarkable ability to heal herself incredibly quickly, in addition to her enhanced strength and magic touch. Next to her was one of the Crystal Crusaders, Orson Fiennes, their commander here on Earth. Member of an interstellar peacekeeping force, he had a special crystal which could animate matter into unique golems or produce various energy lattices to form shields. His crystal replaced his left eye, lost years ago in battle. It was slightly unnerving seeing the light blue glow from the socket. Kid Cosmos was next to him. He had been Cece's second sidekick after Greta, and the two had worked together on many missions. He also was trying to go his own way, in this case by joining the Stormbreakers. While usually he and the next member, Dauntless Dynamo, were always making jokes with each other, they were both appropriately somber for the occasion. Dynamo had chosen not to appear in costume, instead wearing a simple suit. His ability allowed him super speed, but also let him charge up energy with every step on the ground, which could either power his speed or be directed elsewhere, like in a mighty punch. No Man, the Chinese hero, still wore his face mask, though his identity, like everyone else's, were well known. He had always been an ear for the team, and Greta wondered if his quiet and reassuring persona as a hero influenced his decision to come in costume. Just like his power, the ability to bring anything in his range to a complete stop, his inner strength was often underestimated. Next to him, Renaissance Man was also easy to underestimate. as his only supernatural power was the ability to have lived for several hundred years. The rest of his skills, such as his precision marksmanship, in-depth knowledge of science, and multiple martial arts proficiencies, to name a few, had been gained the old-fashioned way. He just had more time to dedicate to them than everyone else. And lastly, Psychurge, the greatest psychic on Earth, and once its greatest magician, was standing at the end. His crystal red body didn't have its usual green cape, but instead a black suit to try and dim his colorful appearance. Greta knew that Psychurge's real body was trapped in the spiritual plane or something, and that the crystal red body was just an avatar whose bright appearance he could unfortunately not shut off for such times. Of course, there were many other heroes, too. Greta thought she could see a few unsanctioned heroes as well, heroes who refused to divulge their identities for the government and instead worked as vigilantes. Unsanctioned heroes spanned the gamut from honorable protectors who just wanted to keep their secrets to violent psychopaths hardly better than the villains they fought. The ones Greta thought she recognized here, though she couldn't be sure as officially she didn't know any of their identities, were of the former variety. One grizzled old man in particular she was convinced had been Silverfang the Hellhound, but absolutely no one knew for sure who Silverfang had been. And then, Greta saw some people that made her blood boil. Sitting in her wheelchair with a black veil over her face and her scar, she was so far going unrecognized, and she preferred it that way. But if she was ever tempted to reveal her presence, it was as she saw two of her least favorite people on the planet. Anton Griffin, the Gargoyle as she called him, had dared to make an appearance here. Owner of Griffin Industries, he had been on the Stormbreaker's watch list for almost his entire adult life. It was an open secret that he and Captain Cosmos hated each other, and that Anton was behind several fraud schemes, political coups, and assassinations. But infuriatingly, he always stayed one step ahead of the heroes, and they could never conclusively prove he was guilty of any of these things. The man's usual thin, black, graying hair, sunken eyes, and oval lenses on the tip of his nose were unmistakable once you met the man. The fact that he had the nerve to show up to his arch-nemesis's funeral was as infuriating as it was predictable. And the other, who Greta had a special hatred for, was the communist mirror to Captain Cosmos himself. While they didn't look alike, the comrade's receding black hairline and thick mustache in sharp contrast to Cece's bald and clean-shaven face, the two were evenly matched and considered the champions of each side of the still ongoing Cold War. He was Comrade Cosmos, a name clearly ripped off from the captain's, though naturally the Russian hero claimed that the idea had come from his government's cosmonaut program, and that they were the first to have a Cosmos hero. Greta had lived her earliest years under his government's shadow. She knew very well that the peace and equality he promised was a lie. Even now, as China was becoming a little more capitalist by the day, the Soviet Union clung on to the old ways. Greta suspected that the only way it still could do such a thing was with the help of the ever-watchful hero who ran most of the country behind their leaders' backs. Otherwise, surely the CCCP wouldn't have made it to the 21st century. Naturally, after being united by the threat of invasion, the politicians wanted to maintain a unified front, and no doubt that was why he was here. Still, it was a disgrace in Greta's opinion. Greta had known Jack Alhross better than anybody. She knew that he didn't want this show. If it were up to him, he would have had a small, private funeral with his family. But as Greta thought about it, she also recognized what he would say about this sort of thing. I'm gone, and it's not about me. This is for the world, so that they can heal and move on. It should be what they want, not what I want. And in that sense, this ceremony was exactly what he would have wanted. And yet, why did it make her feel so empty? Try it again, Dr. Phelps said soothingly. Greta held back a groan. She knew Dr. Phelps had something to tell her. He was just checking a few last things before he finally spat it out. For that reason, she patiently stood in the center of the mat once more and sent her energy down to her feet. At first, the familiar pulse and tingle of a shockwave hit the bottoms of her soles, and for a split second she thought she had risen off the ground, but then was firmly on the mat once more, even as she tried sending a continuous stream of energy downwards. Nothing. Her feet tingled, but she didn't move. They were in the physical therapy room, off to the side by themselves. Greta needed unusual help for her unusual physiology, and so her therapy was, by default, experimental. Dr. Phelps nodded. Yes, this is consistent with my theory. And what's your theory? Greta said as nicely as she could under the circumstances, which turned out to be somewhere between an exasperated sigh and sarcastic eye roll. I believe that your internal energy matrix is out of sync. What does that mean? Out of sync with what? With itself. Here, do you remember about your internal energy matrix? You're talking about how I shoot laser beams or concussive blasts or shock waves. Yes, specifically, it's how your body transmits that energy to your eyes, hands, or feet, respectively. The network is closely aligned with your nervous system. Just like your brain, there's a left side and a right side. And so the two sides are out of sync? Yes, exactly. So what, I have to have someone go inside my head and get the two halves to start talking again or something? No, not really. What's out of sync are the energy waves. They've been phase shifted so that they cancel out. Please don't make me ask for it in English, Doc. It's actually rather simple. Let's imagine we had a pool, or a large aquarium tank. On one side, we have a wave machine, which makes nice regular waves. You can watch them go to the other side of the pool, and you can see where the peaks and valleys are. Now, if you put another wave machine in, but had it out of sync with the first wave machine, something interesting would happen. If one would pull while the other pushed, so while one is trying to make a peak, the other would try to make a valley, what do you suppose would happen? You get a mess? Well, in the messy real world, yes, but in an ideal world, the theoretical world, two waves, be they water waves or sound waves or any other type of wave, when one is phase shifted so that its minimum output occurs at the same time as the other's maximum output, they cancel each other out and you get nothing. So that's what's happening inside me or something? Basically, yes. When the bullet struck your right brain, it disrupted your left side's energy matrix. It seems that as your body tried to heal the wound, it accidentally re-established the energy waves on your left side out of phase with your right. Almost perfectly out of phase, unfortunately. My right brain affects my left side. I didn't make the rules. Okay, so when I try to use both sides at once, they cancel out. That's right. So what if... Greta balanced on one leg and tried shooting energy through it again. This time, she hopped off the mat, but without her other leg, quickly started to come crashing down. Dr. Phelps tried to catch her, but was just a little too late. Careful, careful! Are you all right? Peachy, Greta replied. The doctor helped her back to her feet. Well, at least that works, she said. But for now, flying is out of the question. I need both feet to do that. Probably, but maybe not, Dr. Phelps said. Obviously, the technique you used before won't be viable, but that doesn't mean it's the only technique. You could develop a way to fly by alternating impulses between your feet. So like what, I'm going to airwalk? We don't know until we try, but not now. Baby steps. Your concussive beams seem to be functional, so there's another spot of good news. Yeah, Greta said, and lifted her palms to shoot out a pair of light concussive beams that hit the wall. One reddish pink, the other sickly green. It's just one of them is green now, she muttered. But it is equally as effective, so long as the two beams are separate. So what if I put them together? Greta asked, and then immediately tried before Dr. Phelps could reply. The two beams overlapped, and instead of becoming stronger, they entangled, fizzled, and disappeared about 3 feet in front of her. Greta sighed in frustration. Is there any way you can undo this? She asked. We'll keep looking, Dr. Phelps responded, not directly answering the question. But this was a result of your body's natural healing process. If we dig around too much in there, we might just make things worse. Greta almost said, how could it be worse? But she had been in enough tough situations to know that it could always get worse. It was just hard to believe it when she felt so awful all the time. I see you're still wearing your bow. What? I didn't notice, Greta lied. Keep your hopes up. We'll work something out, Dr. Phelps said. Maybe you can even use your hand beams to sort of fly, push yourself off the ground. Greta raised an eyebrow. Air hand walking? I don't think so. Let's stick with baby steps for now. Greta hated to hear herself say that, but she was determined that she would get out of here on schedule. 4 more days, and if she had to take baby steps to get there, fine. She was sick of this place, and she wasn't going to let the rest of the world pass her by while she was stuck here all alone. The shapely woman entered the small building by the airport. As she did, 2 more figures stepped out of the darkness, bodyguards for the man with the sunken eyes.
"Must we do this every time?"
The woman sighed, holding up her hands.
"You don't seem me concerned as to whether you have a weapon."
"My dear," the man replied from his chair, "that is because I never carry a weapon. It lulls the mind into a false sense of security. If a situation ever arose in which I needed a weapon to defend myself, it means I have failed to adequately account for all of the variables."
"If that were the case, shouldn't you be aware I came unarmed?"
"I was."
"Then what's this show for? Your boy's a little lonely?"
"It's a reminder of your place." As the guards stepped back, the woman stepped into the light, revealing her painted-on face and light, nearly floating, purple, translucent hair. Her face was framed by a piece of black fabric stretching out around her head like an anti-mask, leaving her face exposed but covering up her ears and her neck.
"Let's cut the crap, shall we?"
the woman said, losing some of her false charm. Her face, while exquisitely feminine with its bright red lips and long dark lashes, had also the slightest hint of masculine features, perhaps in the slightly wide jaw. Still, she was strikingly beautiful, and now she was no longer playing games. "You came here under the impression that you deserve payment," the man in the chair said. "I'm curious as to how you led yourself to such a false conclusion."
"The deal was Captain Cosmos died, and he did," she replied.
"Not by your hand."
"You wanted xenocyte poisoning. You got it."
"I wanted it through a bullet."
"Look, Captain Cosmos is dead, and one of his little hangers-on got the bullet. Isn't that worth something to you?"
The man leaned forward into the light slightly. While it reflected off his glasses, it didn't reach into the sunken pits where his eyes were. "When you approached me, you assured me that this was something you could do, that you could make the shot no matter the circumstances. The simple fact of the matter is, you did not."
"It's hardly my fault the man got all heroic and decided to sacrifice himself. I couldn't have."
"When you make promises, it does become your fault. Choose your words more carefully next time. I don't appreciate being lied to."
As if you've never given a promise on which you couldn't deliver.
"If failing to pay for a job that wasn't done correctly counts, you can add this to your little list of grievances against me."
"Oh, come now,
"Do not say my name."
Paranoid much?"
"Am I?"
"Well, maybe not, considering the circumstances. Look, bottom line, I took out one of the Alhross brats. Now, if you don't want to pay the full amount, fine. But I did the legwork, and that doesn't come free."
"Maybe if you had killed her, we would have something to talk about."
"I'm sorry, headshots kill most people. What do you want me to do about it? She's in a maximum security hospital with people watching her every move."
"I expect you to do nothing."
"So you are backing out?"
"If you kill her, I will pay. But there's no need to run off after her. Just wait. She will come to you." And the woman with the white face smiled as she finally understood. So ends part 1 of Child of the Stars, Woman of the World. Join us next time to discover what happens as Greta finishes her recovery, if she can still be the hero she always wanted to be, and if she can find out who did this to her. Meanwhile, we find out who this mysterious assassin is and exactly who hired her. Find out what happens when the two finally meet next time on the Mirage Barrage.